I'm Rebecca Bowl with CyberCube. I'm here with Chris Shafer, AVP, the US Cyber Solutions Specialty Practice for Guy Carpenter. Also joining us is Josh Pyle, who's Actuarial Director for CyberCube. We're here today to discuss a groundbreaking new study that CyberCube conducted in collaboration with Guy Carpenter. Firstly, Josh, to set a bit of context to the report, could you maybe talk about the data that is available in the cyber risk arena, which some say is lacking? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it just becomes a different modeling exercise, in my opinion. We're so used to modeling out natural catastrophes. Some spaces in insurance, like auto and home, have had decades of great data. And so now we find ourselves with very limited data and at times of poor quality. And so it becomes an issue not so much of laying models on top of that existing data, but making sure that where we don't have that great data, we come up with a transparent, granular, logical framework. And so we really need to focus on different aspects of the data. For one, if you can imagine a company has been breached, that company now has a lot to deal with. Their focus is not reporting back at a very granular level that's ready for modeling. And likewise, we have to think about the completeness of that information. We don't know everything that's happened. We know some of what's happened. And so the trick becomes using whatever we can from the data, but then where that data is absent, creating a logical framework to fill in those gaps.
Chris, there is talk of a cyber protection gap where the losses that are suffered by corporations as a result of breaches, cyber attacks, is far greater than those losses that are insured. How do you think we could breach that gap?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's a few dimensions to the protection gap that's out there. The major ransomware events from 2017, both WannaCry and NotPetya, highlighted how much of a protection gap there can be from a global perspective. But I think, once you look at different regions in the US, there is better coverage in terms of what insurance is covering versus what the economic losses are. In other countries, sometimes it comes down to sort of a value proposition. So our company is convinced of the value of buying cyber insurance in order to cover losses that they may be suffering. There definitely is a gap, but it's been improving, and I think that as companies have been, there have been examples in the news of different types of attacks or fines and penalties being levied against various companies for certain breaches, that's going to improve.
So we discussed a little, there around individual losses, but a cyber catastrophe, a systemic loss that could affect multiple companies across industries and geographies, arguably is yet to occur. And I think that sort of brings us on to the report that we've just launched with Guy Carpenter and CyberCube, which is a US cyber insurance industry loss estimates in it. What was the thinking behind the study there, Chris?
Yeah, so we reached a really opportune time in the industry in terms of being able to leverage both the maturing market within the US for cyber insurance, as well as the maturity of models and other tools in order to assess the exposure that we all face. So we wanted to take advantage of that in order to create the first really detailed, data-driven analysis looking at what an insured loss would look like at the US industry level. And so we were able to take an insured synthetic portfolio and with representative terms and conditions as to what you might see in the market, and then use CyberCube's model in order to examine where the most critical scenarios are that we need to examine, be able to dissect what that means then from a business perspective and from a risk management perspective.
Great, thank you. So, Josh, based on this research, what was considered to be the most likely scenario to cause, with catastrophic potential for the industry?
Yeah, so we actually, as part of the CyberCube model, examined 23 scenarios probabilistically. And as a part of that, what fell out of a very long time period, I think we simulated 10,000 years, was 5 prominent scenarios. And of those, I think the most notable findings were things like cloud disruption. So that could be data loss or an outage or ransomware, but also a zero-day vulnerability on an operating system. So something that's commonly used across the industry. And you can imagine if that was attacked, the impact that that would have on business interruption. So those were some interesting scenarios that kind of fell out of that process.
And finally, in your opinion, what more needs to be done to elevate the understanding of cyber insurance at a market level?
There are a few dimensions, obviously, to this, and I think as an industry, we need to continue to stay nimble and ahead of our understanding of cyber risk. Everyone acknowledges that it is an evolving risk, and so I think to work tightly with cybersecurity experts in the space and make sure that we're using the latest and the greatest in order to examine this, it's going to be very important. And then also studies like this, which help sort of create a thought process and a procedure in which to examine what the risk would look like, both on average and sort of in the very infrequent years, can help inform risk appetites and allow for companies to set goals that will allow them to grow sustainably.
Josh, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say it falls down to collaboration and standardization. So when I look at the industry, I see a lot of companies wanting to enter, but everyone is using different exclusions, different language, different coverage forms. The more we can kind of speak the same language, I think the more comfortable we'll all be, and that will only serve to help grow the market. So the more we can start using the same language, talking about the same scenarios, we all have a better collective understanding.
I'm Rebecca Bowl for CyberCube.